This is YG and YG Roundtable, built by Max Weiss. I'm your host, Pat Miller, the Idea Coach. Today, I'm leading a discussion on first-time leadership for entrepreneurs. YG Roundtable is a place to explore big ideas, challenge conventional thinking, and stay in touch with trends. For more content shaking up the business industry, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm bringing together subject matter experts to share their thoughts. Today, we're talking about first-time leadership for entrepreneurs. Let's meet our guest.
Hi, I'm Shalini Nag, president of Evidasolve, and I work with business owners to create exceptional cultures and transform their people into exceptional professionals.
You can't turn on LinkedIn without having someone showing up trying to teach you how to be a leader, right? It's like the most talked about thing when it comes to improvement and becoming a better business professional. But leadership is not easy, and you're certainly not going to learn it from some 90-second video that someone puts up on LinkedIn. So I'm really excited to sit down with you today for just a one-on-one conversation about leadership. But the concept itself is so broad, we couldn't even cover it in 30 minutes. So I want to target a little piece of it. I want to target entrepreneurs that have grown their business to the point when they have to bring in team members, right? So they started a thing and they're growing it, and okay, now I have people that report to me. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. So I'm really glad that you're here because I've seen you speak, I've read your stuff. I'm really excited about it. So let's start here with the biggest question. Is leadership for everybody? Can anyone be a leader?
Those are two separate questions, Pat.
Oh, okay, let's start with, is leadership for everyone?
Is leadership for everyone? No. And the reason I say no is because there is the capability aspect. Can everyone become a leader, which was your second question.
See, yeah.
And then there is, does everyone want to be a leader? Mm-hmm. Because being a leader is very different from being an expert in whatever it is that you are an expert in, or whatever it is you really love to do. And so it becomes a matter of choice, not just capabilities. So is it for everyone? I would say no, primarily because of that aspect of interest and motivation and whether that's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. Can anyone become a leader? I would say yes. I remember this quote that I'd learned way back when we were studying Shakespeare in school. And he said, some people are born great, some achieve greatness, and others have greatness thrust upon them. And I think it's the same with leadership. When you really think about it, just replace great with leader and greatness with leadership. And it's essentially the same thing. Yeah. For those who are born leaders, that's what they are, that's what they do, you can really see it. But others can definitely achieve it. It's a longer journey for sure.
Yeah. How would you define leadership so we understand where you're coming from with the concept of being a leader?
I love the definition that I heard from Eric McNulty when I was interviewing him for my book chapter. And he said, leadership is what exists in the space between the leader and the followers.
Say that again. Leadership?
Leadership is what exists in the space between the leader and the followers.
Yeah.
And it was so simple, and I thought it was so profound, because most of the leadership 90-second videos is all about what do you do? Or what do your people do? But very few really talk about the space in between. How do you really connect with people in a way that allows you to inspire them to follow you? You're only a leader, so you can be in a leadership position because you have been promoted to it or whatever. But you can only be a leader if there are people following you. And it is that relationship that's leadership.
That's a great answer. I've never heard that phrase before. I'm going to remember that one. That one's really good. If someone's sitting around thinking about, I have to grow my team, I'm going to be a leader because my business is successful. How do they know if they have what it takes?
I would say the first thing I would say is the fact that they're thinking proactively about the fact that they will be a leader and they're considering that question is check mark one. I mean, for most people, especially those running a business, they get to the point where they're overwhelmed and then they hire somebody to take on the work. They don't really think about the fact that their role is going to change. So it's more of an outsourcing of tasks rather than leading that they're stepping into at that point. But for someone who's really thinking about, I'm going to be a leader, what can I do differently? And is it a fit for me? I think the first step would be to really reflect on what is the context within which your leadership shows up. So, and I mean a business context because we are obviously talking to that audience.
Sure.
When an organization grows from being a mini startup, right? You're one person doing everything, and you're then stepping into having new people come on board. That growth comes with a variation in the types of work that you do. In the first early phase, you're doing primarily innovation. You're probably doing some market testing. You're driving some results. But as you grow further, your work that needs to get done changes. You still do some innovation, but the proportion of driving results, creating structures and processes increases. And then when you hire people, there's a new quadrant that appears, right? Now you have to develop people. And so the question is, when you're thinking about leadership, how are you thinking about the context? What work needs to be done? What are your strengths? Where will you be best? And where do you hire people so they complement you? Because now what you're really thinking of, I almost envision it as an orchestra. You're thinking of becoming a conductor from being a musician. So what do you need to think about, and how do you find out that's a fit for you?
We're just getting started. Let's take a quick break and come back with more from Shalini. This episode of YG Roundtable is built by Max Weiss and is sponsored by Health Payment Systems.
Max Weiss is a company that does it right the first time. A company that sets the curve in excellence. Rolled, curved, formed, forged, fabricated. A company that delivers on time. A company that drives innovation forward. A company that has satisfied customers for over 75 years. Anything metal, Max Weiss Company. Call or visit us online to learn more about Max Weiss Company.
For more than 80% of families, today's medical billing practices are confusing. At HPS, our goal is to improve the healthcare experience for the patient by making medical bill payments less stressful. In Wisconsin, that's all made possible by our comprehensive independent healthcare provider network. We simplify billing and lower costs for everyone involved in healthcare and offer various ways for individuals to pay without breaking the bank.
So you mentioned the fourth quadrant. We got to put that on hold for a second. We got to get back to something that you said, changing from a member of the orchestra to the conductor, and how your life changes when employee one shows up. Yes. So I'm an entrepreneur, I'm growing, my life changes. How does my life change, or how should my life change when I have my first employee?
First of all, like I said, you're going from being an individual, right, a violinist, for example, to a conductor. What that means is you can no longer focus on just playing the violin in a great way. You have to know how the different pieces of the orchestra fit together. So your perspective shifts, right? That's the first one. You end up thinking more in terms of how does the violin and the flute and the drums and everything, how do they all fit together? So that's the perspective shift. You need to go from thinking more tactically to more strategically. The second thing is you're no longer doing the work. You are facilitating the work. Mm-hmm. So your role shifts again from being the worker to the facilitator. And then I would say the final thing is your role changes from having the answers to asking the questions.
I don't know if everyone gets that. I don't think especially first-time leaders inherently understand what you just said, right? That you're asking the questions, not providing the answers. Is that one of the things that trips up first-time leaders? They don't realize that they have to ask more questions and listen rather than give answers and tell?
For sure. I think that is so both of these things, right? Shifting from being the doer to the facilitator trips them up because they've been so used to doing everything that it's almost like you're giving away your baby. And nobody wants to do that.
No.
So they want to own everything and do everything because they have figured out how it best works for them. What they need to step back and ask is, how does it best work for the business? Not for me, but for my business. And that helps them move away, I think, from doing the work to facilitating it by whoever is best for the role. And yes, for sure, asking questions is a skill in itself. Asking them in a way that generates new conversation, new ideas, and gets your people to feel like they can be active contributors and to step up is yet another skill. But I also think what sometimes trips people up is the perspective, that strategic versus tactical perspective. Because a lot of times you're so used to being the musician that you're focused on that and you don't realize what's happening with the rest of the orchestra. And you need to shift up, because if you don't, you feel fragmented. You feel like you need to tell the violinist how to play the violin and the drummer how to play the drums, and that fragments you. But when you work at your level, which is the level of the facilitator, of the leader, you're asking them questions and you allow them to do the work. So you no longer feel fragmented because you're really seeing the whole orchestra and not individual pieces of it.
Changing your behavior, we talked about that. But you're really changing what the entire business entity is as soon as another person shows up. So asking more questions rather than providing answers, but also as soon as one person shows up, the sky is the limit. You have to think about everything differently. Like, you have to envision that your business is bigger and can be bigger than it was before, because it might only be 2 people, but the ball game is completely changed. Yes. So that has to be a mindset shift. You said something earlier I want to go back to. Hiring that first person to supplement your weaknesses. How do you go about finding out what you're not good at in the first place if you don't have employees already telling you what you're not good at in the first place?
I mean, there's a whole bunch of assessments. So I always say self-awareness is very important, right? The 90-second videos, they'll keep telling you about self-awareness.
Yeah.
They don't tell you what you as an individual need to be aware of, but all of them talk about self-awareness because that is key. And part of it is understanding what you do almost without thought, without effort, what feels effortless to you. And in the context of a business, you can almost divvy it up into all of the different functions or the roles that a business has in a mature business. And as a solopreneur, you basically do everything, right? You're the accountant, you're also the admin, and you're the salesperson, and everything in between. Think about what comes naturally to you. What do you really get energy from? And that's where your strength probably lies. And then, of course, there are a whole bunch of Google it, like there are hundreds of assessments, right? Pick one, take your pick. But essentially, the idea is you need to know what works, like what works for you, what you're really good at, and then think about what you don't like doing. Because you're not liking to do something automatically means you'll never be brilliant at it. So find people who are good at doing that. So A, you don't have to do anything you don't like. And B, someone who likes to do it gets to do it. So it's going to be way better than what you could possibly have done.
Yeah, and then you get to look at them weird, like, how do you enjoy doing that stuff? I hate doing that stuff. I'm so glad you're here.
Exactly. That's what all the coffees, the team meetings and coffees are about, right?
Yeah. Understanding what you enjoy and leading through your strengths is another nuance. That when people think about leadership, they think, oh, that is how you should lead. But if I'm hearing you right, there are many different correct ways to lead. And if you lead through your own strengths, you have the best chance to be successful. Is that right?
For sure. And at the level of the skills, that's entirely true. I just said Google it. But when you Google it, you'll see everything from authentic leadership, courageous leadership, inclusive leadership, I don't know, and another 10 different adjectives leadership. But really, which one fits you, which fits with your values, with your strengths, and with your business? Because every business is unique. So when we try and put a standard way of doing something, it's like taking an engine from a Mercedes, putting it into a Honda, and then expecting it to actually work. It won't work. It has to be right for you and for your people. And then thinking about this whole concept of many different ways, right? It's interesting that the language of people in the context of an organization has shifted to talking about human capital, thinking about processes, etc. But people are unique. Each person has their own unique needs and aspirations and values. And leading is really about getting to know those differences and getting to know those strengths and using the strengths. Minimize the weakness, yes, but use the strengths. And I think therein lies the customization and the need for understanding and reflection and intention. So that this is where, is it for you? Becomes a question. Do you really want to do all that work, or do you just like playing the violin and you want to keep playing the violin?
Yeah, and sometimes the best violinist gets thrust into leadership, and then they have to confront these issues. And they often go down the road where they miss playing the violin. That's what they want to do. And then they're not a great leader, and they're not effective. That's a whole nother episode. I'm hoping that this episode, since it's on our YouTube channel, will find someone who is getting ready to be a first-time leader, or they are a first-time leader. And I want to stop talking about the leader for a second. I want to talk about the people that they're leading. What do these people want out of a leader? What is the contract? Like, what are they looking for out of a good leader? Because I'm sure no matter how you lead, they're probably looking for the same types of things.
Absolutely. So everyone wants to be in an environment in which they can excel. The question is, what is that environment? And I call it the success delta. It is an environment of high trust, high inclusion, and high development. High trust, because if you do not trust each other, you can never figure out a great way to work together. Because if I don't trust you, I'm going to micromanage you, which is a waste of my time and a waste of yours, etc. Right? Many other symptoms. But micromanaging is a big, an obvious symptom. The second, high inclusion. Why do we need that? Inclusion, a lot of people think that inclusion is really linked to the whole concept of diversity from the racial diversity perspective or from a visible diversity perspective. But it's not, because as long as there's two of us, there is diversity. The way your background, where you were brought up, the strengths that you have make you different from me. And therein lies the difference between the perspective of diversity from the whole racial concept and inclusion. Because what inclusion does is it helps me as a leader, or helps you as a part of an organization, to both have a voice and to avoid silence. So there's a distinction here. Voice means you actually share your strengths and your ideas in order to enhance whatever it is we're working on together. Silence is when you don't highlight your own issues with the system around you. And the interesting thing is, it is not always the people with the voice who are not silent. So there's not really a correlation between the two. So someone who actually comes up with great ideas for work could also be silent when it comes to how difficult they are finding your workplace. So being inclusion actually eliminates those issues by ensuring that you're always improving your own leadership and the environment you're creating so that the individuals can excel. And then finally, high development. When people are recruiting, it's often fun to see job ads, and it looks like everyone wants a purple squirrel that can dance on one leg while balancing 10 plates on their head.
With 20 years experience.
With 20 years of experience doing that. The purple squirrel is so much easier to develop in-house. Because when you do that, then you're actually creating someone who not only has the skills that your business requires, you're actually building goodwill and you're building loyalty, as opposed to trying to hire someone who's perfect, because nobody will be perfect, because your business is unique. You're not copying somebody else, I hope. Right? So I think that's where these three characteristics create the environment that any employee or any member of an organization would love to be in.
Of those three parts of the delta, which one do you think they yearn for the most?
I would say inclusion. And the reason is because, studies show that when employees feel heard, they are 5 times likelier to do their best work. And inclusion is really about giving them voice, allowing them to play to their strengths, allowing them to contribute. So I think that's what they yearn for most. But ultimately, when you think about the environment, it also they're interrelated, so it engenders more trust. So the more inclusive you are, the more trust you will build between you and your team, allowing all of you to function better and more effectively.
I remember when I was a first-time manager, I thought, and I say manager because I wasn't a leader yet, when I was a first-time manager, I thought I had to tell everybody what to do, right? And that if I didn't know what they were supposed to do, I was failing. And I was definitely not being inclusive in my management and giving people a voice. What's happening with that inclusion delta? Because you made the distinction between diversity and inclusion. And there's a lot of focus right now on diversity for wonderful reasons, but is that drowning out some of the other parts of inclusion that you find important that you just commented on?
I don't think it is technically drowning it out because most professionals working in the space, so most D&I experts, right? It's almost like it's called D&I.
Yeah.
You cannot have one without the other.
Yeah.
And now, of course, it's evolved to DEIB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
I have never, hold on, I've never heard DEIB until right now. How old is that? Is that brand new?
No, it's not brand new. Not in the field.
I guess I live under a rock. I've never heard that before.
It's not new in the field, but it
Okay.
is not common knowledge.
Okay.
And this is where your question about diversity and inclusion, like the drowning out,
Sure.
comes in. For most organizations, when they focus on diversity, they focus on hiring diverse people, but they don't focus on creating an inclusive environment. And that is why most diversity initiatives actually fail. This is when you're looking for a certain kind of diversity in a targeted manner. But the thing is, without inclusion, any initiative to actually retain high performance, high performing employees is going to fail. Because the more high performing an individual is, the more valuable voice is to them. The less heard they feel, the less likely they are to stick with you. Because they are brilliant and you're not letting them basically showcase their brilliance and work in their area of strength. And I think that's where, if we start with inclusion, diversity will become easier because when you hire them, they have a voice, they're able to tell you what needs to change to make them better and more effective.
So let's take it down from theory for a minute. I just started a business. I hire you. You're my first employee. Just give me an example of how I could make sure inclusion is a part of our weekly practice. Are we holding coffee talks? Do we have a Slack channel open? Is it really that simple?
Is it just the two of us?
Yeah, it's just,
Okay.
well, you're employee one.
Okay. If you are the first employee, the certain areas that you can look into initially is, one, when you are defining the scope of the job, do I have a say in it? When you are telling me what needs to be done, are you telling me what I need to achieve, then letting me figure out the best way to achieve it? Are you asking more questions than saying things? So are you more inquiry-based versus statement-based?
Yeah.
And really, when you can see all of these have a drift, right? I'm actually heading towards conversations.
Yeah.
Inclusion, because it lies in the space between the leader and the follower, is in the conversation. How are you having your conversations with your employee in a way that creates space for them to actually contribute? The more you try to, and I think this is also the difference between trying to manage someone and trying to lead someone. Okay. When you're managing someone, you do what you do with processes, right? You define everything, and then you measure everything in minute detail based on whatever process you have defined. When you lead people, you inspire them to achieve the best that they can, which is probably better than you can.
Right.
If you step out of their way. So ultimately it's in the conversations.
So let's go back to the leader for a second. So someone's got their first time leadership assignment. They're trying to make the best of it, or they've hired employee number one. There will be times when they have to make decisions and they're not sure what to do. Do you trust your gut? Do you read a book? Do you listen to others? Do you ask for advice? Do you get a mentor? How do you know how to make the right decision? Because there's a lot of areas of gray when you're making decisions.
I always say start with the values and purpose. What is the purpose of your business? What are the values that you and your business stand for? If you have those clear, every decision you make, well, the next step is goals, right? Once you have your purpose and your values, you have your goals. every decision you make, you can ask, is this aligned with my values? Will it help me serve my purpose or my business's purpose? And does it help me achieve the goals, like short-term, medium, or long-term?
Sure.
That makes decisions fairly easy because you can say no to all the things that don't fit. You can delay things that don't fit for your goals right now. And you can definitely focus on and prioritize the things that need to happen. You brought up an interesting point there about making decisions where you don't have all the information. I think it's one of the key requirements of a leader is you have to be comfortable with ambiguity and change. You have to have a systems approach and look at the trends, look at the bigger forces that impact your business, and make decisions based on that. But you have to understand that some decisions will be right and some will not be as right. But are you making the best decision based on what you know now? And I think record keeping of decisions is very important for that purpose. Because a lot of times in hindsight, we say, oh, we should never have thought that, or we should never have decided that.
Yeah.
But based on the data you had at that time, that was the best possible decision you could have made. And I think we often, as leaders, are very hard on ourselves for having made errors in judgment. But those errors it's just the nature of business, right? You have to take certain risks for the potential rewards.
I'm very passionate as an entrepreneur, and if I ever were put in a leadership spot again, about self-care, confidence, owning the decisions that you make, and then giving yourself the grace that they might be wrong. There's a risk-taking that I think is directly tied to self-confidence and the base of the business, right? If this goes wrong, are we going to survive? Yes. Then it's not the end of the world. Make your best call and move on. And when I see people that feel like they're walking a high wire, like they can't make any mistakes, I always equate that to some self-confidence issues. Is that what you observe too?
Self-confidence is one, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel isolated.
Oh, okay.
They feel like they have to make all of the decisions alone and they don't really need to. One of the big challenges that they have in feeling isolated is most leaders feel the way you did as a first-time manager, that they have no one to rely on. They have to have all the answers. I think that's where relying on their people really helps, because your people probably know or have part of the picture. So if your job as the conductor of the orchestra is to put those pieces together, but you need to glean those pieces from your people first. And then you may find that there's still gaps. That's where advisors, community of fellow entrepreneurs, all of these things step in at that point. So you can get your job is to create the most complete picture you can. And then, yes, ask that question about what's the impact. And I think there is an element of confidence that comes in when people are caught up in the somewhat legacy view of what a leader should be, which is, you're always strong, you're invulnerable, you have to have all the answers. If you feel that's who you need to aspire to be, anyone will have a confidence crisis. If there's no room to learn and grow, who's perfect, right? If your aspiration is perfection, a confidence crisis is bound to happen. I think if we are humble enough to understand that, yes, we are wrong sometimes, and yes, there's room to grow, and yes, we can learn from the people around us, I think that confidence issue automatically goes away, because now we're just trying to run a business. We are an entrepreneur.
Right.
And like every other entrepreneur, we'll make mistakes. We'll learn from our mistakes. We'll learn from our people, and maybe they'll stop us from making some mistakes if we listen to them, right? So yes, there could be an element of confidence, but I think it's more the pressure we feel to be perfect.
I do think it's uncommon, though, for first-time managers to sit down with their team and say, I don't know what to do. What do you guys think? That isn't, I'm not the only one on the planet that couldn't do that, right? That is a common thing, isn't it?
That is a common thing, and I think that is a common thing because of this legacy perspective. So, leadership, the way leadership is taught and so on, it came about in this industrial era, right? Where everything was very structured, very hierarchical, very top-down.
So we're a first-time leader, and we have employees. And if you're an entrepreneur, I think people are inherently wanting to grow their business and grow their abilities and become better at whatever they do. So if someone's a first-time leader and they want to get better, there's podcasts and a million things out there. Like, what's the one thing you would ask them to do first?
The one thing is ask your people how they want to be led. Because podcasts, books, etc. are great for you to understand the theory and great for you to understand frameworks. But really, every individual is different and what they need from you is different. If you have a team of two, how you need to lead one of them is different from how you need to lead the other. So the only way you can really know how best to lead them is to ask them and then adapt to what they need, because that shows that you're really including them and their voice in how you are doing your work.
And it's not traditional, or at least there's a part of me that feels out of tune if I'm managing two people, but managing them completely differently. Like, I was taught back in the Stone Age that you need to be consistent and you have to make sure that everyone's treated the same. But part of the art of being a true leader is not treating everybody the same. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. So I think the difference is between equity and equality. Traditionally, we've always thought equality is the best thing, which means you treat everybody the same. But what you want is equity, which means you give everyone what they need in order to perform at their best. And because inherently we are all different, we need different things. For example, a particular individual may thrive when you just tell them, hey, we need X by such and such a date, figure it out, come back in, I don't know, a week, tell me what's done. Somebody else may thrive on interaction. And for them, when you tell them X, the next step might be, hey, like, could we get on a whiteboard on such and such a date and like draw out what we're going to do? And it's different, but they'll appreciate it because this process won't work for your employee number one. And employee number one's process will just make employee number two feel like you've left them to sink. So it's really about understanding each of their strengths and using them, but having this conversation with them so they understand why. And I think the consistency part comes in terms of how you show up. If you say you'll do something, do it. If you commit to helping them in a certain way, do so. If you ask one person what they like and don't ask the other, then you're doing things differently. That's where consistency fails. When you don't pay them equally for equal work, that also is lack of consistency.
That's generally bad, I hear.
Very bad idea.
When you do that, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
If there's anything you take out of this episode, don't break the law, right? Yeah, that's good.
Don't do that. But when it comes to how they work, right, on a day-to-day basis and how they interact, the more you can give them what they need, the better it is.
Is it important to announce to your team, announce might be the wrong way to say it, but be confident and upfront that you believe in equality, equity, not equality, such that people may understand that you're managing everyone to their strengths. So you may see that one employee has this and this employee has that, and so they're not questioning how others are being treated? Or is that something, as you mentioned, how you show up, that just comes through you as a leader as they observe you interact with everyone else?
I think both could work. Both could work. A combination could work. I would say, honestly, sharing always is a good idea, because what you might find is that they then begin to help each other, which is where you want to be. Getting everybody in a room and you don't need to have this discussion one-on-one. You can have this discussion in a room saying, hey, what does if you have three people, what works for you? What doesn't work for you? And sometimes you may find that you can't give them something that their colleague can. And maybe they can go off and do that brainstorming session themselves and they don't need you, and then that you've saved more time and they have a better product than if you were there. So I always am for transparency in topics like this. The more people talk about it, the more you make it acceptable to have these conversations, the more they will talk to each other and the stronger your team becomes.
This space between leading and following, this space that's created through transparency, your drive to talk with the employees to get the answers that you need by asking questions, is really illuminating, especially for a first-time leader, because again, when I remember I was in that spot, this is not how it was approached, nor I was not coached that way. So this is definitely a paradigm shift for some, and I think it's really, really important that you're sharing this, because even if you're bad at it, let's say you're a first-time leader and you're not good, but you're asking more questions than telling, and you're being more transparent than cloudy, you're probably going to do better, even if you're a lousy leader to begin with, right?
For sure. I mean, even the example of, I'm just thinking about an example of just being in the room, and if everybody it's a brainstorming session, for example. The old way would be the leader comes in and they're the first ones to speak. And the moment you have spoken in a statement, you will find that only the people who agree with you will then voice their opinions and support. And those who maybe would have disagreed or have ideas that seem like it disagrees would stay quiet. If that's what's going on today, try this experiment, just try it once. Walk in and ask a question, any question, and then do not speak, just listen. By equalizing the playing field and taking yourself out of the equation, you'll get so many more ideas. And if that happens, you're already one step ahead in your journey to leadership.
That's great. I need some more tricks like that. So that's a good one. Talking with your employees and asking them what they need, asking them what we should do next. What other techniques and tactics come to mind that might not seem natural to us when we're a first-time leader? Can you think of anything else?
So, I like I was saying, the space between the leader and the follower, it is actually full of conversation. And it's an interesting conundrum that we all talk, but we don't always have conversations. Because a lot of leaders feel the pressure to talk at their people, not talk with them. And a lot of companies and startups and groups of people working on the same thing, they have a lot of meetings, but they don't really get to any outcomes. I would say, go ahead and read my book chapter, which is coming out soon. I talk about having the right conversations at the right time, with the right people, in the right way. I call that Conversations for Business Success, and have a training that fits that. But it's really about how do you engage with the right people in the right way so that you're achieving the outcomes you want to. That context is important because one mistake that a lot of, I think, people thinking about leadership make is they think about leadership as independent of their business. So not that they don't want to do it in the context of the business, but they treat it as being separate. So it's almost like you have a whole strategy for your business, and then you have a strategy for your leadership, and the two are not really cohesive. And when that happens, how do you expect to get the results you desire for your business? Because you can be, Eventbrite had this issue. They had the happiest employees ever, but they were a pretty mediocre company. And that's why in the Success Delta as well, I talk about high development. You really need to think about, in the context of the business, how are you going to manage your leadership? How are you going to have those conversations?
You mentioned the book chapter. Tell us about the book. Congratulations, by the way. Can you share it with us?
Thank you. Sure. So I am a co-author in volume 4 of #1 annual best-selling book series called Brilliant Breakthroughs for the Small Business Owner. This volume will be available on Amazon on November 11th this year, so only a couple of weeks away. And there are 9 co-authors talking about everything from profitability, people, productivity, and having peace in your business. And so I think it's a brilliant read. The series itself is a great read for any small business owner. My chapter, of course, focuses on taking the human approach and embracing that to drive your business. So I talk about the Success Delta, describe it in more detail, and I talk about how you can have the conversations for business success.
Let's talk final thoughts. First-time leader. Someone's tuned in. They're now overseeing employees. What haven't we talked about that you want to make sure that they hear from you so they can lead their people better and grow their company?
Be intentional in your leadership. Be intentional because being mindful about what you're doing, observe yourself, right? Reflect on what you're doing, what you're not doing, and use that to guide you. And when I say be intentional, I'll also throw this one in there. Be a thermostat, don't be a thermometer.
Okay.
So your job is to regulate how people feel in your environment, not to reflect how people feel in the environment. Hence, be a thermostat. And you can only do that if you're intentional, right?
Yeah.
You're observing what's going on, and then you are actively modulating how people are feeling.
That's amazing. I didn't think we'd get into HVAC, but here we are. It was a fantastic conversation, and if you're a first-time leader, I hope you got something out of it. Shalini, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Pat.
Thanks to Shalini for sitting down on YG Roundtable, built by Max Weiss and sponsored by Health Payment Systems here on the set at Serendipity Labs. YG Roundtable, built by Max Weiss, is YG TV's place to explore issues facing the business community and learn from subject matter experts who stand out in their field. If you've got an idea for an episode or you'd like to appear as a panelist, drop us a note on our website, younggunsmovement.com. And for more great content shaking up the business industry, subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'm your host, Pat Miller, the Idea Coach, and a big thanks to Shalini for coming on the show. See you next time.